Hello and welcome to another tutorial. So this time around we are going to be continuing to build on the real-time strategy, the RTS game project. So what I'm going to be adding this time is getting us set up for being able to build things. So setting up our sort of core things to hold the information for the buildable items, being able to set up some of the things for how that building actually happens, and really just sort of getting that infrastructure up and running. And I want to try and set this up so that we've got a lot of options. So I want to be able to support things where you can have multiple things building at the same time, or you could have a centralized building. I want to support being able to have things get queued, or being able to support having a global limit on the number of things that can be built. So I want to have a fair bit of flexibility here with it. So let's dive on in. Okay, so the first thing I need to do is I want to get set up a whole bunch of these sort of different things for holding the data. So how I want to approach doing this is I want to essentially have a database of all of the buildable objects. And then I want to, with our buildable objects, split it out into different sort of subtypes and be able to customize the data for each of those types, but also have common data that's there for all of them. So this is something where scriptable objects are sort of my go-to way of approaching this. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder for our buildables. And then in here, I'm going to create a few different sort of scripts. So initially, I just want to create the main ones. So what I want to have is I want to have a database for our buildables. So I'm going to get that one set up. I want to also have a bit of a setup for the different types of things that can be built. So I want them to have a common base class. So I'm going to have SO buildable object base. And then I want to branch off of that with 3 different types. And so what those different types are going to be is, if we think about it, I want to be able to build upgrades for things. So upgrades are going to be one type of one. I want to be able to build other buildings. So that's going to be another type. And I want to also be able to build units. So things that can move around the map. So those are my 3 initial types. But the way we're setting this up, it will be quite easy for us to actually go and then have additional types if we're wanting to, and split that out further. So I want to really be able to make sure I'm supporting a lot of different ways of working with this stuff. Because there are a lot of different ways that strategy games follow for this, and I really kind of like all of them. I'm a big fan of real-time strategy games, and I love seeing more of them. So I want to support a few different approaches there. So we have buildable and building. So that's all of the stuff for actual buildables. Now I'm going to reorganize this a little bit. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a building system folder. Then I'm going to set up a scripts folder. Just going to do a little bit of reorganizing here just to make it so that everything's a bit better set up. Okay, so we've got our different buildables here, and then I'm going to set up a folder for our builders. So these will be the things that actually do the building. So again, I'm not going to have any customizations of these yet, but I will have a builder base that is going to have common functionality. The reason I'm calling it base is because I could see scenarios in the future where I do want to inherit from this. and have customization. So I do want to support that, even though most of the functionality will actually be in the base class. And that looks pretty good. So we can start to get these set up. So let's go in and we're going to set these up. Okay, so the first one I'm going to get set up is actually going to be the database. There's really very little to it. So we'll go to the database and we'll get that done and out of the way. Now this, I could see further things being added to it in future. So that's definitely something I could see further extensions happening with this. But for now, I'm going to keep it really simple. So we just need our create asset menu. So our menu name will just be RTS and building database. Have our file name, and then we'll have, we'll just call that building DB as our default sort of name for it, or buildables. It's actually a more accurate name for that. And then all we're going to store here is, and you'll notice what I'm doing here is I want this to be a property. So I want this to not be able to be modified externally, but I still want to be able to edit it in the inspector. So I'm going to have my public list SO buildable object base. And this is all of our buildables. So we just do the get and private set and just new like that. So that's all we actually need for the database. There's nothing sort of further or fancier that we need for it. Now we can start with the actual object base. Now this is going to have a little bit more in it. It's going to be off of scriptable object, and it's also going to be abstract. So we don't actually want this being directly instantiated, so I'm going to mark it as abstract. Now I want to be able to, although I'll have separate classes for the type, I think it's useful also to have an enum here for the type, and there's a very specific reason for that, because it kind of enables me to do a handy little trick. So I'm going to have not set, then I'm going to have building, unit, upgrade, like that. And I'm also going to give these values, and I'm going to say, okay, well, building starts at 1, unit 101, and upgrade 201. This way, if I have specializations of things like the building, stuff like of that later, then I easily can accommodate that. So it means I've got 100 IDs in between these that I could use for other building related things. Same with units, same with upgrades. So it just makes that a little bit cleaner, a little bit easier to be sort of working with, which is always really handy. So now I want to have public type, and we're going to do same sort of pattern we're going to follow for a lot of these things, where we set that to not set. Now, other things that we're going to want. It's correct, we do want a name and a description. So we want those populated in there. We also want a cost. Not that we've got a currency or anything like that at the moment, but we want to support being able to set a cost. So those are kind of our core bits of info. Then we've got things that relate to the actual building process of it. So we want to have things like our build time. And we want to also have things like, okay, if it can be queued, what is the limit of that queue? So how many can be queued at the same point in time? Because that is a thing that I want to support. I want to also support a global build limit, because something like an upgrade, we only want to build that once. We don't want to build that, be able to build that multiple times in most cases. There might be particular cases where we do want to, But in this case, I want us to be able to give us the flexibility of supporting that. So we'll add in for a global build limit. And although we're not focusing on setting up UI, I want to also have our UI image like that, because that is a thing that we're going to end up having. We don't have it at the moment, but we will end up setting that up. And then, because I want these properties to be serialized, I'm going to do a serialize field like that, and then the exact same thing for these. So when you see that syntax of field colon and then something else, what it's doing is it's applying this attribute to the backing field for this. So properties have a backing field typically, and this one, all these will have a backing field, so this applies it to that. Now, there's a very specific reason I set up this not set one, and that's because I want to be able to give defaults for these for the different types. So like with an upgrade, I want to actually have that default to the global build limit as 1. And that can be a little bit tricky to sort of do, and there's kind of a way we can work around doing it with our setup for scriptable objects. So what we can do is we can add in a private void reset like this, and then I'm going to check, and actually this whole thing can be in the Unity editor. So F Unity editor. So this code will only run in editor mode. So we have like of that. Then what I want to do is F our type. So it was our, we'll change that to actually building type, just because type could easily be used for other things. So if our building type is not set and application can check that it's not playing, so this will get run when the scriptable object is created. So then I can have an initialize defaults, which I just have protected, and actually abstract makes sense for that. So that's good. What I can now do is I can now go and my upgrade, my unit, and the building all inherit off of that. And we'll see that they are currently grumpy because we haven't set up that function, and that's okay. So they'll actually be telling us it doesn't have that one there. So what I can do is the actual just default sort of fix options it will show. We can actually use those. So we can tell it to implement that. Now I do want to wrap this in #f Unity editor, because the function doesn't make sense for us using outside of that. And then I can actually set up the default values for all of the particular things. So, okay, well, this is for an upgrade. So first thing I'm going to do is base initialize defaults. Actually, no, I don't need to do that because it's an abstract one. So what I can do is I can set the building type. Actually, that should be buildable type, just so we're being consistent with the naming there. So we'll go for buildable type, and that is going to be upgrade, and we can set the name. Now we did make these private sets, so we're just going to change those over to protected. autocomplete is really handy, but sometimes gets things wrong. So we're going to set the name to upgrade, the description to the name for now, the cost to 0, the build time to 5 seconds, the queue size limit, so how many of these can be queued at once, to 1, and the global build limit also to 1. So that looks pretty good. If we go over to our unit, then we change a little bit of stuff here. Global build limit -1, so we have it not apply, and we'll give it a queue of 10. So we don't change too much with that. And then building, well, we only want to be able to build one building at a time, but we still don't want the global size limit. So it's good. Now we can set this up. So we have create asset menu. So again, we go for RTS, buildables, building, and we'll give it a file name where we might call that build. We might make it BLDB. Yeah, give it a bit of a prefix. So BLD building, like that, I think is good. Set these for all of these other ones. So this is BLD unit. And then we have it also for the upgrade. And this should mean we can go and actually set up the data for these. So there's not too much involved with sort of these ones, but now we can actually get the data set up for it. So I want to just check if we're free of errors, and we're not, so that's right, that needed to be buildable type. But now let's create some data. So we're going to have our data folder. And then what I'm going to do is, well, we do need a building database, or buildables database. I want to create a couple of buildings. So we'll have building, and this might be power plant. We're going to have barracks. And let's also have a factory. And we'll just update the names of these. And we can see it's got the defaults in there, which is good. So our setup for being able to populate those has worked. So that's a handy little thing to do with the scriptable objects. I have seen things mention that you could do the same with awake, but what I found was with awake, it would be briefly populated and then would disappear, whereas reset reliably worked for setting the actual sort of data up. So then we're going to have our unit. So we'll have a soldier. Soldier. Description, obviously, we would do further with that. But for now, we just want to know that it's actually got the right data. And we can see this has got the right defaults there in terms of unit. And then we'll create, just so we've got one of everything, an upgrade. And this is going to be better turbines. So that's good. And I will put them into separate folders. The reason I didn't initially is so that I can easily select our database and lock the inspector. and then just drag all of these into there. So it was purely done to make that step easier. And then now I would set up separate folders for the different things, so that all buildings are in one, and so that we also have units in another, and then upgrades in another again. That's good. We've got our data set up there now. Now I want to be able to actually use it. So what I want to have is I want to have this builder base here. So I'm going to create an empty object here called builder that I'll attach the script onto. And then because we want to have support for global build limits, so we have separate builders here, I want to be able to have something overall that's coordinating. So we're going to have a global build manager. And so there'll only ever be one of it, but there could be multiple builders present. So global build manager, like that. And so now our focus is on getting these set up. So the builder base is going to handle the actual logic for doing the building, tracking how long it is, and the global build manager is going to be something there to sort of keep track of so we can enforce global build limits. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is set up the global build manager. So there is only going to be one of them. So we're going to do our usual setup for having it be a singleton. So my usual setup, and then we have an awake, which in awake we do that. But the first thing I want to do is check if instance is not equal to null. And if it is not, then I want to destroy not the instance, but the actual game object that it's on. And there's a reason for that. Destroying the instance would be a less impactful scenario. It would make it that it is less intrusive if something goes wrong. But if something has gone wrong with this, and we do end up with multiple, that's actually a pretty major thing. So I really, really want to avoid that. So I actually want it to fail kind of loudly. Which is why I'll also log out an error. Found duplicate global build manager on game object name, just so we've got that error. So, okay, we've got our awake that's going to set up a singleton. Now, if we think about things that this needs to do, so this needs to know how many of a particular thing has been built, and it also needs to know how many things are in progress, because it is how we keep track of stuff to enforce those limits. Because if something can only be built once, but we've got multiple builders, they need a way of communicating with each other. So the global build manager is going to always get informed, essentially, when building things like if that is happening. So what it's going to maintain internally is a dictionary that the key is going to be our buildable object base, and it's going to have then an int, and this is going to be our global build count. And that is going to have our usual setup like that, and we just knew that. Then we want actually a pretty much identical one that is the in progress counts. So build in progress counts. So these two will keep track of essentially how many things have been built in total and how many things are in progress. So it's going to be really handy. So they're going to need to know when different things have happened with the buildings. So I'm going to need stuff like, okay, Well, an on build requested, and it's going to need to get some information there. I'm going to need a on build cancelled. Now, I'm intentionally not setting up parameters or things like that for these yet, because I don't necessarily know how that data is going to look yet. So what I want to do is just know here are the things that I have to be able to call. On build completed. So yeah, I just want to know the things that I'm going to have to be able to call, and then I'll be able to set up the particular functions. So, okay, those are things we're going to need to be able to hook into. And then we have really kind of the core of what we need to set up, which is our builder. So the idea is that we could have multiple of these builders present. And that, a builder could be, a global menu on the side, or a builder could be an individual building that you select, or it could be a unit. So lots of different ways that a builder could work. And I want to be able to essentially support all of those different methods. This is going to have a bit of sort of generic stuff in it. But the idea is because that lets us support multiple different styles. So, okay. Now, while it's building, I need to kind of be able to keep track of things that are building. So I'm going to have a public class build data. And the idea is that this is going to track the information about what things are actually building at the moment. So, okay. Well, this is going to have a builder base and the owning builder. And we'll do the get and private set like that. We intentionally are not newing that. Don't need that. We're going to have, oops, we have a bracket missing. So we're then going to have, okay, well, we need to know what we're building. So object being built, like that. We need to know what the current build progress is. So the current build progress. Like that. And that looks pretty good. So when we set this up, so this is one case where I will set up a constructor for it, because I actually only want to be getting in a couple of bits. Now that is actually really impressive for the autocomplete. I'm going to let it fill that in, but I'm going to remove the current build progress, because that just gets set to 0 when we set it up. So that's good. And then the only other thing I want to add to this is a tick function. So public bool tick. Rather than accessing delta time, so doing time.delta time, I want it to be passed in. And the reason I want it to be passed in is we might have stuff that accelerates the build speed or that slows it down. So by having delta time be passed in for things like this, it means that outside of this, we could have other things affect that and could scale up or down the delta time. So then the current build progress, we do a good old clamp 01, current build progress plus delta time divided by our object being built build time. So it's going to give us something that will just count up. I will, not that it needs it, but just because I like it being clearer, I'm going to put that in brackets. And then we'll return true if the current build progress is greater than 1. So it's good. We've got something keeping track of our build progress, and we can then tick this. And I like this model of putting the ticking logic inside that internal data. Just makes it a little bit easier for working with, I find. Okay, so our builder needs to be able to know what stuff it can build from. And again, in terms of this sort of idea of supporting a range of different things, I want to make it that I can support, that sort of kitchen sink style building, or something that's very specific of what it can actually build. So I'm going to have a couple of things here. One is I'm going to have the database, so buildables DB. That I also want to have the ability to filter, so have a list buildable object base eType permitted types. So the idea being that if this is empty, all types are permitted. Otherwise, if it only has particular ones, then we can only build those. So we'll give it a tooltip as well. If not empty, then can only see these types of, well, these types of buildables. And I might want to be able to restrict even further. So I might want to have an actual list that is essentially, here is an override of the permitted buildables. So we're just supporting a couple of different ways of working with this. So if not empty, then only the listed buildables are supported. So that's good. So we'll have a bunch of different ones there, and we'll do some stuff soon to populate that. Oops, it's going to do it like that. So, okay, we've got our set of things that are able to be built. What I'll do is, because we will filter that down, so I want to have a buildable base type, and this is going to link to that. And this is essentially going to be our working list. So available buildables. And I'm just grouping it into a dictionary by type like that, just because I think there might be things we're wanting to do for, display purposes, stuff like that. So I think handy to support that from the beginning. So, okay, we've got that. Then I want to keep track of the build sort of in progress. So build data, builds in progress. So that's good. And so we're looking pretty good with the setup here. We can start to be populating some of these things soon. Now, if remember, the global build manager needs some data provided to it. So there's actually, I want to set up a few different events. And I'm actually going to set up quite a lot of ones, and there's a reason for that. And the reason is that I want to be able to support a lot of different use scenarios. So having a range of different events there is going to make it a lot easier for us doing that. Okay, so let's set up these events. So these are all going to be serialized field ones, but I'll set that up in a moment. So actually, I'll set it up from the beginning because there's going to be a lot of copying and pasting. So it's going to be a Unity event and not the queue system. And I want to pass in build data. Just check that didn't add in an extra using, which is good. So this is going to be on build, and then we're going to have our different functions. And what I'm going to do is I'm just actually going to set up a lot of additional ones. So I need to add in using the Unity engine .events like that. So we've got that added in. And then I'm going to duplicate this quite a lot. As I said, there's a lot of things that I want to provide hooks for. So I want to know when a build has been queued. So when it's been requested or queued, I want to know that. When a build has actually started, so when that building is in progress, I want to know that. When that building is paused or resumed, because we might be doing that. I want to also know if it was cancelled. And we know if the build has been ticked. And then finally, if it has been completed. So a lot of different Unity events, but this is going to make it really, really easy for us being able to pass on that data. So what that means is these are actually going to take in builder base, build data like that. So these will get that information. We haven't populated any of it yet, but we know that those are going to hook into some of these events. So, okay, we've got a lot of our infrastructure ready. We need to start making it that we can be building things. So this dictionary, we need to build that up. So what I'm going to do is in awake. Now, we have a couple of scenarios. One is we've got this override list. So, okay, if override permitted buildables, if there is valid ones there, then what I want to do is I want to sort them out into that list. So I'm going to loop through all of those. So buildable in that. And then what I do is, so our available buildables, and we go buildable dot building type. Now that is going to be giving us back, and that actually should be a list of those. So what I want to do is have a list. So it's a little bit of setup stuff, but it is going to get us what we need. Buildables of type. So we have that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go f available buildables, try get value, and we try to retrieve this buildables of type like that. Sorry, not buildables of type like that. So yes, like that. Then we go out. So if it fails to do that, then what I want to do is go available buildables. We put the type in. Is a new list like that. And then I can also, at the same time, go buildables of type. And then down here, buildables of type, and we add that in. So it's kind of a little handy little way of working with this. So because list, this is actually referring to the one that's in that dictionary. So I can try to retrieve it. If it succeeds, puts it there. And then if it didn't succeed, I add it. And then I can add the buildable in. So it just works kind of neatly for setting it up based upon the type. So this is an are we overriding the buildables? Otherwise, we go from the database. Populate using the database. And it's going to be fairly similar to this. So this is actually a pretty good starting point. So with this, it would be buildables DB or buildables. So far, nothing really needs to be changed. The only thing we need to check is we might have a type filter. So if permitted types count is greater than 0, and permitted types, we do a contains like that. So if it doesn't contain it, then we do a continue. So we skip it if it's not a permitted type. That's good. We've now got our list of ones all set up and being able to run with those. So that's excellent. We need to now start to do some of the things for actually essentially trying to request doing building. What the interface is going to look like is it'll return a bool indicating if it's succeeded, but we'll have a request to queue build, and it'll indicate the buildable. And then, okay, I need to check that this is something that we can actually build, because if we can't, then we should just exit straight away. So I'm going to have can build, can append build, can build. Let's just make sure it didn't include anything. And we have buildable. So if we can't build, we return false. And the default will be return true. So we'll have a public bool can build like that. So, okay, the can build will return true if it doesn't fail out any of the checks. So first thing is going to be, is it in our buildables of our available buildables? So F available buildables. And then if we remember, that actually is a dictionary of lists. So I want to do the try get value for buildable and the buildable type. And we'll call this buildables subset. And we'll make that an out. And that's just going to be a list buildables subset. So if we successfully get, well, actually we check if we failed to get the value, we return false. That means there's none of that type. And then we would check if buildables subset doesn't contain that, we return false. So, okay, we've checked that it is in our list of things we can build. If it isn't, then that will remove it. Now the stuff in terms of the queue size limit. So if the buildable has a queue size limit, then I need to check the number that are being built. So num being built, and this is something where I want to be able to say, hey, global build manager, get the number of builds in progress. For that buildable. So this is a function that I need to set up here. So when a public int, got that, and we provide the buildable. So this just needs to return the number of ones that are in progress. That's essentially its job. So we can go int num in progress is 0, and we just return that. Then what I will do is, because we've got a tracking here of builds in progress counts, so we can go build progress counts, try get value, like that. So that'll tell us the number of builds that are in progress. And what we can start doing is things like when build has been requested, we can start to actually add things into that list. So what I would do is here, num in progress equals get number of builds in progress, buildable, build data, object being built. And then all I need to do is our in progress count, like that, is num in progress plus 1. If a build has been cancelled, then it's almost the same, the -1, but just for safety, going to do a mathf max of 0 with that, so we know that it's always a positive number. If a build has been completed, then it's going to be a similar thing where we should update this like that. So we do that for both it being cancelled or the build being completed. And then what I also want to do is when it's actually finished being built, we have our global build counts. And we want to be able to do a similar thing there. So I want to be able to update that. So we've got the number in progress. I want to be able to also do a num built. So get number built of that same thing. And then we would have num built plus 1. So that means I need this function as well. And it's going to work quite similarly. We'll have public int, like that. Buildable object base. Let's call it buildable. We have the number built. What we would then be doing is we would go global build counts, try get value like that, and we return it. So now we've got a little helper functions that are going to make things a little bit easier. Because over here, now I know the number being built. Well, if I know the number being built, then I can go and check, is that, over our actual limit? So that's the total number of ones in progress. So I can say if num being built is greater than or equal to the queue size limit, then we return false. That's good, so we're restricting that. Now, the other thing is we had that global limit. So if our global build limit is greater than 0, then we have our num being built or in progress. And we have global build manager instance. So get the number built of that. So we want to be able to enforce essentially globally unique. Plus also then our global build manager. And then we get the number of builds in progress. That's good. This gives us our total number. So not just what we have built, but what ones we're trying to build. So if the num being built or in progress is greater than that, then we return false. So now we're enforcing our queue size limit, and we're also enforcing our global build limit. Now we could do stuff where the queue size limit might be per builder. That's certainly an additional setting we could add in. But we've got all of the data we need to be able to keep track of that. So that's good. So our request to build, well, we now know here that we can build it, so we can successfully queue up our building. So we'd have build data, new build data. We need to give it the owning builder, which is us, and the thing being built. Then I want to make sure I add that to the builds in progress. And then on build queued, I invoke that. So, okay, we've got things being able to be queued. We've got that request happening. I'm also going to, while we're at it, set up a public bool cancel build. And you have to provide the actual particular build data for it. So with this, F, the builds in progress does not contain it, then I return false. So I want to know if the cancel has actually succeeded. Otherwise, well, firstly, what I'm going to do is remove that, and then on build cancelled, and we invoke that. Just we're providing that information there. So that's good. So, okay, so far so good. Got stuff for requesting, cancelling. Going to actually set up support for pausing as well while we're at it. So I have is paused. And then down here, I'll set up a public void pause, not application pause, just pause. Our own internal one. So what we do is, firstly I'm going to check F is paused already, then we just bail out because there's nothing to do. If there is a build in progress, then I want to go and send on build paused, invoke for builds in progress, and the very first one in that. Then I have a similar thing for resume. So I have is paused is true, and resume will be almost identical. I just want to get it set up so we've got it. So this will be if it is not paused. We turn that off. And again, on build resumed. So we're starting to get a bit more of the functionality in here, which is good. So we're kind of at a point now where we've got a lot of bits being sent. We can start doing our actual update logic for being able to tick things. So if it's not paused and builds in progress count is greater than 0, I'm going to have tick builds, and we'll pass in time delta time. Just like to split it off so it stays a little bit neater. So tick builds like that. So what this is going to do is we'll loop through our builds. Now we're not supporting building things in parallel. So we're going to start at the beginning like that. And then build data. So what I want to do is I want to check if this build hasn't actually started yet. So if build data has started, if it has not started, then I want to go, okay, well, on build started, invoke like that. So the has started is pretty straightforward. Public bool has started. If the current build progress is equal to 0. So if it's equal to 0, then it hasn't started. So if it hasn't started, we send the onBuild started message. We want to check if it was finished. So what we do is build data, tick delta time, like that. If it's finished, well, actually, first we'll update that we've ticked the progress. So onBuild ticked, like that. Then if it is finished, what I want to do is onBuild completed. So a lot of sending of all of these events. I want to remove that particular one. So we remove at, and I'll make it we remove at that index. Should be 0, but just to be certain. And then we minus the index. So that's okay. And that'll allow it to loop again, because the idea is if it finishes one, I want it to immediately start on the next one. Otherwise, I'm actually going to just do a return. So the idea being we only tick one at a time. Now we could modify this to allow multiple things that are queued to tick, or allow things that are different types to tick. We've got a few different options here, but for now I just want to start it at being a fairly restrictive one. So that looks good. Now we're not sending the sort of events. We could manually link that up, but what I'm actually going to do is in start, what I will do is onBuild queued, and I'm going to add a listener. That will be our global build manager instance and the onBuild requested. And there's a couple of other ones that I'm going to hook up as well. So I want to have our onBuild cancelled and onBuild completed. So those events are hooked up, so that's good. So we're pretty much ready to be able to test this. So I want to set up a few things to make it easier for us to do that testing. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to set up a bunch of debug tools here. These are our header and our debug tools. Big fan of doing this, and it's something that I do recommend looking at doing, especially when you've got complex things like of this. So I'm going to have a SO buildable object base, debug, object to build. I like to make sure that they've got a very clear, very noisy prefix so that you can't possibly think that something is actually should be used in regular code. So we're going to have a log actions because we don't have any UI. So this is going to make life easier for us. Going to have debug trigger pause, which we'll have as false. Have a bool trigger resume, and then we'll have a debug cancel build. And all of these will be serialize field ones, so we can work with them if we need. So that's good. So what I want to then do is, for our debugging, here, if debug log actions, then I want to essentially hook into all of these events. So I'm going to actually grab all of these, and I'm going to paste them down here because I want to make sure I don't miss any. So I'll do like of that. Multi-line editing is honestly the best. So we're going to add listener. So in this case, I'm going to actually declare the function inline. So I have build data, and that is going to point to a thing that is just going to be debug log, And we'll go requested. We'll have some verb here. Build of, and then we will have build data, and our object being built.name. That looks pretty good. And then we just need a closing one there, and we needed an opening one here. I think, from memory, that should do the trick. With a semicolon, I believe. Nope, semicolon goes on the... That's right, it's a debug log, so we have that. So that's good. We've got these. Now we can say queued, started, paused, resumed, cancelled, ticked. So that one could get very noisy. And we have completed. Now the ticked one, that one, what I will do is we could output the progress there for it, but I think just having these log actions working will do the trick. Then in update, we can check, okay, well, if debug object to build, press to queue build, and then we have the debug object to build like that. And then we just null that out after we've done, so we don't continually queue it every update. We also have debug trigger pause, and then that is just going to go pause. We have a similar thing for resume. I think just for consistency, I'll put these like that, just so that we're following a similar pattern for all of them. And then the final one is if we are doing the cancel build, and we've actually got builds to cancel, then what I want to do is I want to go cancel build, and then we just tell it to builds in progress 0, and we'll just always cancel the first one. We could support later on cancelling other ones, but if we go to Unity, firstly wanting to look for if we've got any errors, which we don't, which is good. Our builder needs the buildables database, and beyond that, we should now be able to actually see a lot of logging coming out. Okay, so let's test this out. I've got my builder and I've locked the inspector. So what I should be able to do is drag this over, and I should see it's building a power plant. That's in progress. I'm going to chuck in a barracks while it's at it. And we should see then it builds that. And so that's looking good. Let's chuck in a couple of units fairly quickly. They're on a tank, so we should see it go through soldier, and then eventually we'll have tank, which we do see. So that's good. It's ticking that. Okay, so we've got a lot of stuff working quite nicely there. Let's test the limits on the queuing. So it's queue to soldier. That's 1, 2, because it has a limit of 10. The still letting us queue up things happily. We're at 7 soldiers queued up, 8, 9. So attempt to queue up the 10th. Queues that up. Now we'll try to queue up an 11th one. And you'll see it ignores it. But if I try to queue up a tank, then it's fine. So we triggered the pause. Now if we trigger the resume, and I'll turn on collapse for this, we should see it starts actually ticking up and building those. So that's good. Now we're getting a lot of ones for started build of the soldier, so we want to have a bit of a look at that. Just make sure nothing is going weird there for on build started. So, because the build started should actually only happen once. So we want to check here. If it hasn't started, then we invoke it, and it does tick it. And it does return as soon as it's actually ticked one. I want to check the logic here for has started. The current build progress is 0. We are updating it here. So we'll just double check what happens if we've only got a single thing being built. We can see it does continually say that, but it does actually correctly finish. So we've definitely got something going wrong there with the logic of what's happening. So we noticed that has started was coming through a huge amount, and that is because this should have been greater than. So now if we test this, we shouldn't see has started coming through all the time. So we just get one of it, we get the ticked, so that's good. Now let's test with something that should have a global limit. So we'll build this upgrade. It's ticking, building that, and it's completed it. Now let's try and queue it up again. And we'll see it doesn't let us queue it up. So that's good. We've got our ability to do these sort of ones working quite nicely. Let's kick off a barracks and then cancel the build. So it stops it. So it's good. We have our different interfaces working. With our little debug tools there working as well. The one thing I'll change with that is we should be setting debug trigger pause to false. And then same with resume. But we have our buildable database going and our builder there. I could have multiple ones in the scene. So I could have builder 1 and builder 2. And so if I run with that, what I can do is, okay, well, builder 1, we're going to give you a barracks to build. Builder 2, we're going to give you a factory. And we can see they're able to be building in parallel and are working nicely. So we've got support for multiple builders. We've got support for our build limits. We've made it so that we can support a lot of different ways of working with this data. So next time around, we'll start actually getting our different UI styles and interfaces set up and making use of things like those sprite images and the filtering and get a few different sort of interfaces up and running for this. Thanks, folks. Hope you found the video interesting and helpful. If you have, chuck in a like and subscribe. Really helps out. It's really appreciated. If you've got any questions, chuck those in a comment below. If there's other things you'd like to see included, chuck those in as well. If you're looking for the code for the project, the full code is available up on GitHub. There is a link to that in the description below, and you can use this in any of your own projects. And finally, if you are looking for other ways to support the channel, then I do have a Patreon, and there's a link to that in the description as well. But until next time, bye.